Today, I'm going to give you a little rundown on the US objection handling framework. Okay, so the first idea that I want you to stick in your brain is that objections are opportunities. A lot of international closers often freeze up when faced with objections from American prospects, and that causes their English to feel more clunky and the conversation to spiral out of control. American objection handling follows a predictable psychological pattern, and understanding this pattern transforms objections from obstacles into opportunities. Objections are not random attacks. They are predictable stages in a culturally conditioned decision-making process that is consistent across all the US. The key idea here is that American prospects rarely state their true concern up front. They use socially acceptable surface-level objections to test you out and see how you can handle pressure. Now, the three main categories of objections are the following. First of all, you have the uncertainty-based resistance. In these cases, the prospect is not convinced that the solution will work for them. So they tell you things like, I need to think about it. Then you have the financial concerns. So these are issues with money, budget, price, and value. And then finally, you have the support-based objections. In these cases, the prospects need approval from a spouse, a business partner, or a boss. Now, what you need to bear in mind is that prospects almost always lead with an uncertainty-based objection as a smokescreen to mask a deeper financial or support-related concern, and this is due to a cultural preference for politeness and conflict avoidance. So instead of reactively defending your offer, this framework allows you to proactively guide the prospect through their decision-making process using their objections as diagnostic tools. When an American prospect gives you an objection, they are usually not telling you the full truth. The first objection is almost never the real one. Now, when we're dealing with uncertainty-based objections like I want to think about it or I need to do more research, this really means I'm not convinced that this will work for me. And this is the most critical objection because if they don't believe in the method or the solution that you have to offer, then nothing else matters. Now, when you come across a financial objection, this can be actually a smokescreen masking an uncertainty objection. So basically, what you need to do is to try and figure out if it's actually a genuine logistical issue, moving funds from a place to another and trying to put together the fund or prioritize the funds, or if it's actually a real thing where they cannot actually afford it. Then when you get into support-based objections like I need to speak to my spouse or my business partner, so in these cases, this kind of objection could be either a courtesy, meaning that they have already decided that they want to go ahead with your solution, but they need to inform their spouse or their partner, or it could be an actual permission-seeking thing where they actually cannot decide on their own. So what you need to bear in mind is that US prospects use uncertainty language as a social buffer zone to avoid direct confrontation while they evaluate your trustworthiness. So for them, it sounds professional and it buys them time to think. So they use these safe objections to gauge and check your reaction. At this stage, if you become pushy or defensive, you will fail their test and they will never reveal their real, more vulnerable concerns. If a prospect had already decided a no for a definite reason, like a budget, they would say so. So these uncertainty objections mean that they are still engaged in evaluation mode, giving you the opportunity to continue the conversation. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a closer is to start immediately arguing against the objection. This triggers a psychological defense mechanism called reactance, and the harder you push, the more they resist. So the solution for this would be to use a technique called pacing where you agree with their objection first and then you use validating phrases like, you know what, that makes total sense, I completely understand where you're coming from, or I completely understand why you would want to think it through. These kind of phrases disarm their defensive mechanism. At this point, their brain was prepared for conflict but received alignment instead. This lowers their stress levels and shifts them from a defensive to a collaborative mindset. Now, a common mistake at this point is that after pacing, most closers assume that the objection has been handled correctly and end the call right there and there, letting the deal die in the thinking about it zone. So you need to confirm whether they actually believe that your solution will work for them, separating real uncertainty from the smokescreen objections. So in this case, you can ask questions like, but do you believe that this approach will get you the results you're looking for, right? Or money aside, do you believe that this method is actually what you need? Now here, you actually need to interpret their response. So if you get a weak yes or hesitation, you have found the real objection. So this indicates that they genuinely don't believe in your solution, so you need to go back and rebuild the value. On the other hand, if you get a strong, confident yes, absolutely, then you have confirmed that the uncertainty objection was actually a smokescreen and their real concern is either financial or support-based. So at this point, you can actually move on and try to isolate it further. Now, a really nice technique that you can use on this process process is to try and create what's called cognitive dissonance by highlighting the contradiction between what the prospect said earlier in the discovery phase and their current hesitation. So what you want to do here is to try and reference specific and emotionally charged phrases that they use during their discovery phase. For example, you can say things like, okay, so earlier you mentioned that this problem is keeping you up at night. So help me understand what makes you feel comfortable waiting longer to solve it. The psychology behind this is that humans have a deep need to appear consistent. So when you use their own words to show an inconsistency, it creates sort of an internal pressure for them to resolve it, either by changing their position or revealing their true concern. Now, here's the thing. You're not trying to trap them into a gotcha moment. Your tone here must convey that you're genuinely curious and trying to understand what has changed, which shifts the burden of explanation to them. So the main point that I want to bring home here is that if you become defensive as a closer, objections feel like a personal attacks and you react emotionally. But if you can handle them strategically, objections are valuable information and you respond with curiosity and a systematic process. Now, a really important part of this whole process is for you to actually stop and listen intently during the whole discovery phase, and not just for themes, but for the exact emotional phrases so that you can use them later on during the isolation step. This US objection handling framework is not about winning an argument. It's about understanding the American mindset and guiding prospects through their own decision-making process. Remember that objections are not attacks. They are roadmaps to the close. Now, on your next few calls, I want you to practice this three-step process. I want you to pace the objection, tie down the certainty, and isolate the real concern using their own words. Mastering this framework will make you welcome objections as opportunities.